The night Sienna Ashford Crane turned 38, her husband gave her a gift in front of 200 people, and she smiled when she opened it. That was the part nobody understood later, that she smiled. Not because she was surprised, not because she was grateful. She smiled because the box in her hands contained a bracelet from Meridian. The jewelry house she had built from nothing, the company whose quarterly earnings she had reviewed the night before in her home office, while Garrett was at dinner with someone he called a client. And she recognized the piece immediately, not from the catalogue, from the reject pile. It was a sample from the autumn collection that had been pulled 8 months ago. The stones were real, the gold was real, but the clasp mechanism had a micro-fracture that their quality team had flagged in testing. The entire run had been destroyed. Every piece accounted for, except this one, apparently. Sienna Ashford Crane, 38-year-old wife of Garrett Crane and silent founder of Meridian Luxury Jewels, held the bracelet in her hands and kept her face exactly where she needed it to be. Warm, touched, grateful. Garrett Crane, 41-year-old regional sales director, and the man who had spent the last 3 years telling his wife she was lucky he stayed, stood beside her with a glass of champagne and watched the room watch them. He liked being watched. That was something Sienna had understood about him early, and something she had for a long time tried to love about him. His father, Randolph Crane, 67 years old, and the kind of man who kept score at dinner parties, started clapping first. "That's a Meridian piece," Randolph announced to the table nearest to him, loud enough that the word spread. "You know what a Meridian bracelet costs? I tried to get Evelyn one for our 40th, and they had a 6-month waiting list." 6 months. He shook his head with the satisfied pride of a man taking credit for something he had nothing to do with. "My son knows how to take care of his wife." Sienna looked at the bracelet. The fracture was in the clasp hinge, barely visible, a hairline split in the inner mechanism that would cause it to fail within 3 to 5 wearings. She knew this because she had been in the room when her head of quality assurance, a meticulous woman named Dr. Prisha Mehta, had laid every piece from that run on a white table and explained exactly what was wrong and exactly why they couldn't release it. She set the bracelet carefully back in its box. "It's beautiful," she said. "Where did you find it?" Garrett smiled the way he smiled when he thought he was winning something. "I have my sources." The room responded the way rooms respond to that kind of answer, a ripple of impressed murmurs, a few impressed nods. Randolph refilled his glass. Sienna closed the box. She had known about the affair for 4 months. She had known about the money, the transfers, the charges on accounts. Garrett thought she didn't monitor the hotel bills disguised as client entertainment. For 3, she had said nothing, not because she was afraid, and not because she was waiting for something to change. She was waiting for the right moment, and she had learned a long time ago that the right moment never comes to you. You build it. What she had not expected was the bracelet. That was new information. Sienna had started Meridian 11 years ago in a studio apartment in Atlanta with $40,000 she had saved working as a gemologist for an estate auction house and a very specific idea about what luxury should feel like. Not loud, not obvious. The kind of quality that only revealed itself slowly, over years of wearing, the kind of craftsmanship that the person who owned the piece knew about, even when no one else could see it. She had incorporated under a holding company the way her attorney had suggested, for tax purposes initially, and then for other reasons that became clearer as the brand grew. She had kept her name off the public-facing materials. The creative director was a woman named Sabine, who was brilliant and happy to be the face. The CEO role existed on paper and in boardrooms and in the details of documents that lived in filing systems most people never thought to look at. Garrett had never looked. They had met 6 years ago at a charity event in Charleston. He was handsome in the way that certain men are handsome. The kind of handsome that works well in photographs and at first impressions, and somewhat less well over time. He had been attentive and funny, and he had asked her questions about herself, which she had found genuinely rare. She had told him she worked in the jewelry industry. He had not asked more than that. Later she would understand that was not because he was respectful of her privacy. It was because he was not particularly interested. But she had been 32 and lonely in the specific way that successful people get lonely when they can't explain what they do to the people they're dating. And Garrett had seemed like a solution to something. They married 18 months after they met. Sienna had kept her professional life exactly where it was. Garrett had never pressed for details. It had seemed at the time like compatibility. The affair began, or at least the one she knew about began, about 2 years ago. A woman named Delia who worked in Garrett's office building, not in his company but in the same tower, a fact he seemed to believe created some kind of meaningful separation. Sienna had found out the way people usually find out, not through any dramatic revelation, but through accumulation. a charge that didn't make sense, a weekend story with too many specific details that contradicted each other in small ways, a shift in the quality of his attention that she recognized before she had language for it. She had hired an investigator in January. By March, she had a file. She had given the file to her attorney, a careful and thorough woman named Jules Okafor, and told her to begin drafting. Jules had asked if she was certain. Sienna had said yes. Jules had asked about the timeline. Sienna had said she would decide when she was ready. What she had been building quietly was not just a legal case. It was a complete accounting. Every asset that had come from Meridian. Every piece of her work that had been absorbed, without acknowledgement, into their shared life. The house in Buckhead, the vacation property in Highlands, the cars, the accounts Garrett believed were joint and that were, in fact, funded entirely by a woman whose professional existence he had never bothered to investigate. She wanted him to understand when it happened, exactly what he had been standing next to without seeing. The bracelet accelerated her timeline. The morning after the birthday party, Sienna called Dr. Mehta. "I need you to pull the destruction records for the autumn sample run," she said, "specifically the clasp fracture pieces." There was a pause. "All of them were logged," Prisha said. "I signed off personally. One wasn't destroyed." Another pause longer. "Sienna, are you certain?" "I was holding it last night." She could hear Prisha typing. The silence that followed was the specific silence of someone finding something that should not be there and understanding what it means. "I'm going to need to make some calls," Prisha said. "Make them," Sienna said. "I also need you to document the defect in writing, with the quality report attached, and get that to Jules by end of day." She hung up and poured her coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched Garrett's car back out of the driveway. He was going to the office. He always went to the office on Saturdays now, which she had understood for some time did not mean he was going to the office. She thought about the way he had presented the bracelet, the performance of it, the way he had held the box out, like a man who deserved applause for knowing where to shop. His father's face when he said the word Meridian, the reverence in it, the way Randolph Crane, who had never once asked daughter-in-law what she did for work, had spoken about the brand with a warmth he had never once directed at her. She thought about the 6-month waiting list Randolph had mentioned. There was no waiting list for a sample piece that had been pulled from production. You could not get a Meridian piece that way. You could not buy it from a secondary market. Meridian did not have a secondary market. They had legal language specifically preventing resale. You could not receive it as a gift from a vendor, because Meridian did not give gifts to external parties. The only way that bracelet left the building was if someone inside had taken it. The name that came back to Sienna, through Prisha's calls, and then through a conversation with their head of security, was a junior logistics coordinator who had left the company 5 months ago. A man named Tobin Sharp, who had worked in their Atlanta fulfillment center and who had resigned abruptly, and whose departure had been documented as voluntary. The security director, a calm man named Augustin, pulled the access logs and the inventory records and found the gap. A single piece, logged as destroyed, whose photographic destruction record had been filed, but whose physical sign-off didn't match the chain of custody protocol. It was small, the kind of small that got missed in a high-volume operation unless you were specifically looking for it. Sienna had a copy of the access log on her desk within 4 hours. She also had, through Jules, a preliminary background check on Tobin Sharp that revealed a 7-year employment history, and a reference from the regional sales director of an Atlanta-based company who had described him in a LinkedIn recommendation posted 18 months ago as a detail-oriented professional with exceptional follow-through. The recommendation had been written by Garrett Crane. Sienna read that sentence twice. She set the paper down on her desk, in the home office that Garrett had never once entered, surrounded by materials from a company he had never thought to research, and she felt something settle in her chest that was not quite anger and not quite satisfaction. It was something closer to clarity. She picked up her phone and called Jules. "Move the timeline," she said. The event was Randolph Crane's annual dinner, a thing he had hosted every October for 30 years, a gathering of business associates and family friends that had grown over decades into something Randolph treated as a legacy. He was proud of it. He talked about it the way he talked about all the things he was proud of, constantly, with specific emphasis on what it revealed about him. This year, Meridian was a sponsor. It had been arranged 6 months earlier, through Sabine, as part of a broader initiative to place the brand in contexts that aligned with their clientele. Sienna had approved it without particular thought. She had not connected it to Randolph's event until the venue confirmation came through Jules's office and she recognized the address. She had sat with that for a moment and then decided it was fine. More than fine. It was the room she needed. She told no one. Not Jules, not Prisha, Not her sister Camille, who knew more than most people, but who worried in ways that sometimes cost Sienna time. She arrived at Randolph's dinner alone. She had told Garrett she would meet him there. She had a conflict with a call that ran late. He had shrugged in the particular way. He shrugged when he was already thinking about something else, which was most of the time now. She wore something from Meridian's private collection, a dress Sabine had sent over for the season, a deep burgundy that did not announce itself. The bracelet she wore on her right wrist was from the spring line, production number M2241, the clasp mechanism functioning perfectly. She arrived early enough to speak to the event manager and to stand in the room before it filled, and to note where the Meridian display had been positioned near the entrance, the brand's signature slate and gold signage clean against the white wall. Randolph found her at the bar before Garrett arrived. Sienna. He kissed her cheek in the way he always did, with the slightly distracted warmth of a man acknowledging furniture he was fond of. Garrett's running behind? He texted, she said. He's close. Randolph looked around the room with the satisfaction of a man surveying what he's built. His gaze moved past her to the display near the entrance, and she watched his face do what it always did when he registered the name. They're sponsoring tonight, he said with something close to delight. Meridian, you see that? I've been trying to get Evelyn in that showroom for 2 years. You know they don't just let anyone in. He shook his head. That brand is something else. Whoever built that has a real eye. They do, Sienna said. Randolph looked at her with the vague benevolence he applied to most of what she said. Maybe I can get Garrett to pull some strings. He managed to get you that bracelet, after all. He laughed at his own resourcefulness, twice removed from the situation. The boy knows people. He does, she said. Garrett arrived 20 minutes later, moving through the room with the ease of a man who believed his presence was a gift to the room. He kissed her cheek. He shook his father's hand. He accepted a glass of champagne and began to work the crowd the way he always did at his father's events, orbiting people with money and opinions in a pattern Sienna had watched for 6 years. She waited. Sabine arrived at 8:15, which was when they had arranged it, and Sienna met her near the Meridian display and walked with her to the small reception area that the event manager had set aside for a brand presentation. It was a brief thing, 10 minutes, Sabine had said, just an introduction, the way these evenings worked. What Sabine didn't know was that Sienna had added herself to the introduction. The room was arranged around tables when the presentation began, 40-odd people with their dessert plates and coffee, half listening the way people half listen at these things. Sabine was polished and warm and gave the kind of brand overview that Meridian had spent years perfecting. The story of the house, the commitment to craft, the single image on the screen behind her that showed the studio where the pieces were made. Meridian was founded 11 years ago, Sabine said, by a woman who believed that luxury should be honest, that the value of a piece should be real, not performed. She paused and looked at Sienna, who was standing to the side of the room in a way that had not yet drawn attention. I'm proud to be the face of this brand, Sabine continued. But tonight we have the opportunity to introduce the person who built it, the founder and owner of Meridian Luxury Jewels. Sienna walked forward. She did not look at Garrett first. She looked at the room, the way she had learned to look at rooms over years of presenting in board rooms and at industry events and at meetings where people had underestimated her and then stopped. She let the room find her. She let people register what they were seeing. Then she looked at Randolph. His face went through several things in quick succession. Recognition, he knew her face, of course. Confusion, because what was she doing up there? And then something slower, something that moved through him like a temperature change as he began to connect what Sabine had just said to the woman he had been looking at across dinner tables for 6 years and dismissing. She looked at Garrett. Garrett's face had stopped moving. Good evening, Sienna said. I'm Sienna Crane. 11 years ago I started Meridian in a studio apartment with a gemology certification and a very clear I did not want to make. Tonight I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be among people who appreciate what this house represents. She spoke for 8 minutes. She knew the material the way you know something you have spent a decade living inside. The sourcing, the craft process, the principles of the quality standard that her team upheld and that had, 8 months ago, flagged defect in a sample piece that should have been destroyed. She did not mention the bracelet. She did not mention Garrett. She did not need to. When she finished, there was a moment before the applause where the room was simply processing, and in that moment she watched Randolph Crane look at his son with an expression she did not have a word for. Not anger, not embarrassment, something more fundamental than either. The look of a man realizing that what he had praised and what he had dismissed were the same thing, and that he was the last to know. The drive home was quiet. Garrett sat in the passenger seat. She drove. because she had driven to the event and he had not, and looked out the window and said nothing for the first 8 minutes. She let him have the silence. She had no particular need to fill it. "You could have told me," he said finally. "You could have asked," she said. He didn't answer that. "The bracelet," she said after a moment. "Where did you get it?" She did not make it a question. She had learned, working in rooms with accountants and attorneys and sourcing partners, that statements extracted more than questions. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that they had turned off the highway and were moving through the neighborhood, passing the lit windows of other houses, other evenings. "I know someone who used to work there," he said, Tobin sharp. The pause was very brief, but it was there. "He had it," Garrett said. "He offered it to me at cost. I didn't know it was defective." "You didn't know it was stolen," she said. "That's different from not knowing it was defective." She pulled into the driveway and put the car in park and sat for a moment looking at the house she had bought, the garden she had paid someone to design, the lights on the timer she had selected. "Jules will reach out on Monday," she said. "There are documents that need to be signed. I'd recommend you review them carefully." She got out of the car. She went inside. She took off the meridian bracelet she had been wearing and set it on the tray by the entry mirror and went upstairs to the room she had slept in, alone for most of the last 8 months. She was not angry. She had finished being angry somewhere around February, when the file from the investigator had arrived and she had read through it with her coffee and understood that the marriage she was in was not the marriage she had believed she was in, and that the grief of that was real and should be felt and then set down. She had set it down. The documents were filed on a Tuesday. Jules handled the communication with Garrett's attorney, a man who apparently needed 2 days to stop asking whether Sienna was certain before he began the actual legal work. She was told this by Jules with the particular tone Jules used when she found people's inefficiency professionally offensive. Randolph called on Thursday. Sienna answered because she had decided, some time ago, that there were conversations that deserved to happen directly rather than through representatives. "I didn't know," Randolph said. He sounded older than he had at the dinner. "About what you'd built. I want you to know I didn't know." "I understand," she said. There was a silence that she let him sit in. "I should have asked," he said. She thought about the 6 years of dinners, the way he had talked about Meridian like a distant marvel, the way he had spoken about her like furniture. She thought about the night of her birthday and the way he had started clapping, crediting his son for her own work. "Yes," she said, "you should have." She did not say it unkindly. She said it the way you say something true that has been waiting a long time to be said. They spoke for a few more minutes about nothing in particular and then ended the call, and she sat at her desk in her home office and pulled up the quarterly report she needed to review and got back to work. The company was doing well. The spring line had sold through at a rate that exceeded their projections by 14%. There was a new craftsman in their Florence workshop who was doing something extraordinary with hand engraving that she wanted to see in person. Sabine had forwarded 3 collaboration proposals, 2 of which were worth a conversation. There was a lot of work to do. She had built something real, over 11 years, out of her own knowledge and her own judgment and her own refusal to make things that were less than they should be. She had done it quietly, the way she had always done most things, because she found that quality revealed itself over time without requiring announcement. She had been patient. She put on her reading glasses and opened the report and began.